Welcome back. Up next, we are moving on to the third panel of the day, and it's a very special one. The Ministers' Roundtable, featuring 6 of BC's ministers that work hard in the natural resource sectors. Before we begin, we are pleased to remind you that this panel has a live Q&A component in Whova following the opening comments. And next, we'll have a short message from the session sponsor, Tourmaline Oil Corp. Thank you, Tourmaline, for your support of the 2021 Forum. And it is now my pleasure to introduce this session's moderator, Sharon Singh, partner at Bennett Jones.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everybody. I start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I will not be reading the bios of each of our ministers. Their background and portfolios will be known to you, and how their responsibilities are relevant to the natural resources sector. While we may all have different ideas on the right pathway to achieve economic recovery and prosperity, we can all agree that COVID-19 has demonstrated the resilience of the resources sector and its steadfast focus on people, safety, and the environment. It has also been an excellent example of government, communities, and industries working together to ensure the economic engines of this province could continue operating. For example, the work that was undertaken to keep our mines open while implementing rigorous public health orders. Despite the pivoting that was required, the sector's ability to continue to be a significant contributor to the province's growth has remained unaffected. Ministers, we have an hour to hear what you're doing, and more importantly, what you plan to do and how those listening to you can help to ensure our natural resource industries are able to play a pivotal role in restoring and growing the province's economic prosperity. This is a highly unusual situation, not because of who is on the panel, but the sheer number of you, 6 ministers. So our aim, respectfully, ministers, is to keep the answers tight, assume we know the government's key messages, and launch into the why, how, and when of your policies and details on any execution of those priorities. We know that protecting the environment, advancing reconciliation, and generating economic growth and overall prosperity are key government priorities. The format is quite simple. I'm going to ask some preliminary questions to set the stage, and then we will answer some of the audience questions. You have a 2-minute maximum within which you will provide your responses. Think of me as the speaker, government backbencher, and the opposition combined. So when I think of that, I picture the smiling faces of the Honorable Raj Chauhan, Jennifer Rice, and Tom Shpika, because I believe he's on this webinar today. Your portfolios and responsibilities are interlinked, and I hope that through the discussion that takes place today, we can see how your ideas and initiatives are as well. So my first question, typically something I think the moderators ask at the end, but I think it would be helpful to the discussion today to frame the overall theme of the conference. Each of you will have an opportunity to respond. The question is, identify 1 or 2 actions your ministry is currently implementing or will implement in 2021 to help the natural resource industries recover and simultaneously build our province's economic prosperity. In answering your question, I would like to understand how the action would help and how you are working together as a government to ensure alignment between the respective ministries and mandates. So perhaps I could first ask Minister Conroy to answer that question.
Great. Thank you, Sharon, for the question. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to join my colleagues and speak about how we're supporting British Columbians. And I also want to recognize the Indigenous nations on whose traditional territory we're each gathered today. And you're correct, COVID-19 has had an immense impact on BC workers and businesses, including in the forestry sector. And we acted immediately to support communities right throughout this crisis. But first, we recognized the forest sector as an essential service. That's because it ensures the global supply of products, including lumber, paper, wood fuel, as well as vital hospital supplies like masks and gowns. And I believe everybody in the room would probably recognize that it also provides us with toilet paper, which we all use, and people sometimes forget that. So incredibly important. We also made keeping the lights on for the sector easier, delaying the implementation of new policies and deferring stumpage fees, several tax deadlines, and BC hydro payments for industries and including mills. BC's economic recovery is supporting people and industries in need and investing in stronger communities and a brighter future. And under the recovery plan, my ministry is responsible for about $100 million through 7 different programs. And last month, we joined the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to announce $28 million to upgrade side, secondary, and forest service roads. And of that, $8 million will upgrade forest roads, improving safety and connection and opening pathways for new economic opportunities right across the province. Ministry staff are reviewing applications for our other programs, and funding for them will soon start to flow to communities and organizations throughout BC, including supports for workers and contractors impacted by mill closures or downsizing. But another program soon to be announced is aimed at improving forest health, and that means reduced wildfire risk, enhanced wildlife habitat, and fiber for green energy production. And that's how healthy forests can translate to a healthy economy and a healthy future for BC, while ensuring that we're collaborating with each other on all of these initiatives. So thank you.
Mr. Conroy, I commend you for sticking to the time limit. Congrats. Mr. Ralston, over to you, please.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Resources, it's great to be at this conference. I've come for many years and always appreciate the exchange that results here, even in this format. Natural resources will be a clear priority in the recovery of British Columbia, the British Columbia economy, although the BC Business Council has also suggested that we look to manufacturing, to high technology, and tradable services as other sources of export earnings. I would want to try to answer your question directly. One of the high priorities for the ministry and for the government and my colleagues is as we move towards a low carbon economy, to use the tremendous advantages that we have here in British Columbia to bring about electrification. Roger D'Antonio mentioned some of the sectors where electrification, low carbon electrification, will be a priority. And in our review of BC Hydro, we did identify a number of sectors. So that is one step that's underway, and it fits with our Clean BC program, which I expect you'll hear more of from Minister Heyman. On the oil and gas side, what we've done and we will continue to do is, in partnership with the federal government, we have a program to deal with dormant and orphan wells. Those are increasingly a concern as we move into an ESG era. And we've partnered with the federal government to create a program to incent companies to dormant wells, or those that are still owned by the companies but haven't been active, to clean those sites up. Orphan wells are the ones that through bankruptcy and other proceedings are owned by the government, to clean those up as well. That has given a lot of work to local BC field service companies in the Northeast. We've put out $50 million. I'm going to put out another $50 million at the beginning of next month. So those are two concrete steps that we're taking to work as we work towards economic recovery here in British Columbia.
Thank you, Minister Ralston. I might go to Mr. Cullen next, given that there was reference to Clean BC by Mr. Ralston.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you for taking on the onerous task of trying to organize and manage 6 politicians all at the same time. Thank you to the sponsors and organizers. I'm speaking to you today from Wet'suwet'en, Gidimt'en territory here in lovely Smithers, British Columbia. There's a couple of principles under which I am operating as Minister of State, working primarily with Minister Conroy, who you just heard from. That is around creating consistency and certainty in the way that we develop and transform the ministry. So there's 2 principal tasks that I've been given, and you mentioned in your opening comments, Sharon, that we are all working under 3 guiding principles of reconciliation, the economy, creating jobs, as well as protecting the environment. The Premier has asked me to do a number of things, many supporting the ministers that are here on this conference. 2 specific ones are modernizing land use planning in British Columbia. This is obviously a sweeping task. It has an impact on the work that many of this conference attending hope to do and are doing right now in British Columbia. And under that work, we will be looking to modernize the way that the ministry handles itself and proposing to the Premier and to Cabinet the potential creation of a new ministry of lands and natural resource operations. The second large task that the Premier has asked me to take on is taking Flinrord, this mega ministry, and creating the potential for that new ministry in order to facilitate the modernization of land use planning. In the doing of this, we hope for a broad and meaningful consultation with industry stakeholders, certainly local government, and as well as Indigenous in this. So it's a lot, and it's some important things that affect us all, and we'll do it carefully because we know the impacts are significant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I may have confused some of you, but Minister Cullen's face popped up, and I did mean to go to Minister Heyman because I referenced Clean BC. That's not to add to your portfolio, Minister Cullen, but Minister Heyman.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Thank you for the thoughtful question. Minister Ralston mentioned Clean BC, and obviously as the Minister for Climate Change Strategy, that is a primary initiative of my ministry. But I think it's important to look back a bit. From the days when I was an opposition critic, I was stressing that BC's climate action needed to include clear programs that protected emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries, both to ensure that we remain competitive, we had a healthy resource economy providing a financial base for our programs, and also that we kept people employed. One of the experiences that we've had in British Columbia is we have seen many of our processes in the natural resource industries and our commodities become among, if not the lowest carbon in the world. And I believe a big reason for that is the carbon tax, which is meant to work as an incentive to reduce emissions and therefore pay less tax. We've added to that in a number of ways through the Clean BC Industrial Incentive Program to return a significant portion of the carbon tax, over $30 to industry, as well as the Clean BC program for industry that helps by jointly investing in technologies and initiatives to reduce emissions. We know we need to do more. It's been incorporated very explicitly in my mandate letter to work with industry to ensure that we remain competitive. Before the election, I was having discussions with many representatives of industry in the Business Council about how we can look at our structures around the carbon tax to retain competitiveness. We are continuing and picking up those discussions, and we'll be consulting more broadly. But I think we have a tremendous opportunity in a climate where the world is focusing its investments on low carbon initiatives to have the lowest carbon products and industries in the world, and therefore take advantage of the demand that's growing.
Thank you, Minister. And Minister Kahlon, given your ministry is economic recovery and innovation, Can you please elaborate on some of the comments that were made and also provide your perspective on what you're implementing?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And I'll also start off by recognizing that I'm on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, the Tuasin and the Musqueam Nation. And I want to thank BC Natural Resource Forum for inviting me and my colleagues this afternoon. So jobs, economic recovery, and innovation, it sounds like a bit of a tall order during a pandemic. But I'm looking forward to the challenges and the opportunities to work with my colleagues and many of the people watching in the resource sectors. As you know, we've launched a Stronger BC Recovery Plan, which is part of our $10 billion of COVID-19 response. And just last week, we announced a new project under the Stronger BC Plan, the BC Supply Chain Resiliency and Value Added Manufacturing Project. This is $14 million project that focused on unlocking the potential of BC's manufacturing sector through innovation and through technology. It includes a focus on value-add products, which I know is a special interest to our resource industries. The project has two grant programs, a supply chain grant program and a manufacturing scale-up grant program. The supply chain program will help industry associations address barriers and generate new opportunities for their members. And the manufacturing scale-up grant program, which will start accepting applications a little bit later this spring, will help small and medium-sized businesses adjust and develop innovative products and help them bring those to market. Another goal is to make sure BC has a reliable access to critical goods during this and future emergencies. And it will also ensure BC companies grow while building our domestic manufacturing capacity and creating good jobs across the province, which makes it a great investment in people and businesses in BC. So thank you again for the invite, and for the record, I had 5 seconds to spare.
You can't try to beat Mr. Conroy. That's competition. Then you're laying it down. Minister Rankin, the challenge has been set under 5 seconds. So please proceed.
Oh, I'll have to talk very quickly, Sharon. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here to be the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. I'm in the legislature today. You from the Quangan people from the Hamilton. I'll try to be very specific. Two things I wanted to focus on as priorities are the implementation of the Declaration of Rights of the People and the action under that is that. And secondly, to focus on the long-term agreement we're trying to achieve with Indigenous people as from one-off, purely transactional agreements. That focus, I think, will make a big difference. As most of the people listening will know, we passed the law in Colombia historically about a year ago with unanimous great ground, made some solemn commitments to Indigenous. It's a human rights initiative, of course, but it also, I think, important for the industry is to succeed in improving the investment climate in our province and creating British Columbia, reestablishing it as a world-class destination for investment in resources, creating ultimately an inclusive economy. I think that will be a part by this law requires. So that's our priority, building an act and consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples in order to move forward on that agenda. Second thing I want to talk about is our move away from, if you will, transactional one-off to long-term agreements with our partners. And I've focused on, for example, comprehensive reconciliation agreements, one of which we did recently with Lake Sabine First Nation, which not only supports self-determination and self-governance, but it talks about partnership, business, and I think those are the kind of initiatives that will solidify British Columbia as a destination, world-class destination for natural resource development in partnership with Indigenous peoples. And I have
Thank you, Minister Rankin. I'm not sure if others had difficulty hearing Minister Rankin. I did, so if I may take 5 seconds that was given to me by Mr. Kahlon and Minister Rankin to summarize what Minister said. It's the DRIPA legislation and moving towards more of a partnership and long-term relationship-based approach, moving away from transactional agreements to really support the underpinning of the reconciliation journey that the province is on, to create the certainty that is required for the BC resource industries. And Minister, I will give you an opportunity to say it in your words later when I have another question for you. But I hope I captured
Yes,
captured
you did.
that.
I'm sorry for that. I don't understand what the problem is. Thank you.
No worries. Minister Ralston, perhaps I can get you to answer my first question focused on your ministry. And it builds on the remarks that you made. And I think many non-BCers and even some in BC may have frankly been surprised by the addition of low carbon innovation to your portfolio. But I believe, and after speaking to my colleagues in the energy and mining sectors, they saw perfect alignment in adding this responsibility. It supports BC's continuing journey to improve and brand as competitive advantage our performance in ESG matters and attract that growing market that you're so passionate about in terms of sustainable finance. However, often the biggest barrier is not that companies are unwilling to innovate and deploy those low carbon technologies, but can be de-incentivized to do so. For example, through a regulatory framework that favors proven technologies or a more prescriptive approach, i.e. early adopters are not recognized for their investments, or they lack a track record of technology that cannot satisfy the regulators in terms of ensuring that they meet the permitting requirements. So I'm sure you're alive to these issues. They're not new, and they may have been raised during the creation of the Mining Innovation Hub. So the question briefly for you is, how is your ministry working with industries and others to implement and not just identify the opportunities and the innovations needed to further BC's existing responsible energy and mining sector and brand it in light of the growing acceptance and importance of ESG?
Well, thank you. That's a really great question, particularly coming on the day when Larry Fink at BlackRock has issued his annual letter and has said that the fund that he runs, the biggest fund in the world, will look more and more to ESG investments as a first choice. And so British Columbia is poised to capture that kind of investment. But we have taken a number of steps as well, and I think the renaming of the ministry has been enthusiastically received. I share with Minister Kahlon, who's also responsible for innovation, and we meet and talk regularly about the challenges and the value of innovation, whether it's on the workbench, the people that are at the point of production, or whether it's in the lab, people who are inventing new processes. Innovation really drives a progressive economy forward. So we are doing this in a number of ways. One is to provide the people that can do the work. The Ministry of Advanced Education has had a series of announcements over the last couple of years of creating more tech-specific spaces in our institutions, not just in the Lower Mainland, but throughout the province, and also moving to shift, retraining the workforce as people redeploy as a result of the pandemic through micro courses, through micro credentials, and online learning. We have also, to return to your question, funded pre-commercial technologies. I think probably the best known example in the mining sector is MineSense, where the ICE fund, which is a government fund, invested early in MineSense. It's in operation at Highland Valley Copper, and it's a technology that is being adopted. Mitsubishi made a major investment in the company, and it's spreading out around the world. We have received funding in the recovery program that Minister Kahlon is heading up for a new Center for Innovation and Clean Energy. We're in the process of putting that together, soliciting company support, institutional support, small companies, startups, I would say somewhat analogous to the digital supercluster structure that has been, in my view, very successful here in British Columbia and nationally. So that is coming. And finally, just you referenced ESG. The ministry has held over 3 separate days a summit on responsible minerals and metals as a way to brand British Columbia. It's sometimes hard to imagine branding a commodity, but very clear at the AIM conference, where Robert Friedland, no stranger to the mining sector, said that he could foresee in the future the opportunity where an ESG compliant, and there are different standards, but one that met the standards, would attract a premium for its production. I'd always thought that they'd be able to guarantee a market share, but he says a premium. So the time is right for British Columbia, given our labor standards, environmental standards, our Indigenous relations, our low carbon electrification program. We are poised to capture that interest and that investment globally, certainly in the mining sector, and also in the oil and gas sector as well. So I'm very optimistic about what the future holds for British Columbia as we head towards recovery later this year into next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I was lucky enough to participate in that 3-day summit, and it was fantastic. Minister Heyman, if I may, you mentioned competitiveness in your response earlier. And as you also stated, forestry, LNG, mining, these industries are all to a varying degree using clean, renewable sources of electricity or replacing more carbon-intensive fuel sources, along with what you referenced before, the rigorous regulatory processes which continue to be refined, implementation of continuous innovation. Our resources sectors lead the world in terms of low emissions intensity. So my particular question relates to the BC's 2030, 2040, and 2050 emissions reduction commitments and the immediate establishment of sectoral targets to achieve those commitments. What steps is your ministry taking to ensure that the province's energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries can grow as we emerge from the economic downturn? And is there a potential to expand that pie of I guess, emissions availability that may occur with the proposed BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy that was referenced earlier?
Thank you very much. I'm a little worried that I may have answered the second question in my first answer, but it doesn't hurt to repeat. I think we're at a very critical point. I want to pick up on Minister Ralston's statement that there may well be a premium for companies whose exports meet ESG goals. I think we're on the cusp of that. We're seeing a very ambitious climate program from the new president down south, and we don't yet know, particularly with their America First plan, how that's going to play out for us. But the potential, I think, is there, whether it is in the US or elsewhere, for BC's low carbon commodities and products to not only find market, but to find market with a premium. So our job as government, I think, is to continue to move toward meeting our emission reduction targets, because that's critical. But Clean BC is more than an emission reduction plan. It's about growing and building a clean economy, and that includes a clean resource economy. Minister Ralston talked about mining. Whether it's mining or the gas sector, we're seeing innovation, and we're seeing technologies being developed in BC that can be applied to our resource sector that not only builds our tech sector, and that's why we established the Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. It supports and buttresses an ongoing stable resource sector. Minister Kahlon, Minister Ralston, and I have regularly scheduled check-ins where we talk about how our mandates and how our programs and how our activities can work together to support a clean, healthy economy. So we want to continue to invest in technologies that will allow resource and emission-intensive industries to be cleaner and succeed. I noticed in the news recently that Bill Gates, it was Elon Musk, I believe, established a $100 million prize for the best technological development for carbon sequestration and storage. We have more than one company in BC. We have carbon engineering, we have Sponte, we have potentially others that are well positioned to further the development, to compete in programs like that, and then to apply those technologies in ways that reduce emissions and create space for us to grow our resource economy and still manage our climate reduction target.
Thank you, Minister. With your comments on growing and building a clean economy being the centerpiece of Clean BC, or the overarching objectives, perhaps Minister Kahlon, given that you were referenced by Minister Heyman, I can turn to you and ask you a two-parter, which I know you love. And it will shift the focus a little bit on forestry and other innovation, general innovation. Could you elaborate on this much talked about mass timber strategy and how it can address some of the barriers to the forestry industry's growth? And also on the strategic investment fund, which I appreciate maybe in early preliminary planning, that will see the government invest in high potential BC businesses to help them scale up and grow. How will the resource sector feature in this fund?
I muted there. So thank you, Sharon, and I'm super excited about the mass timber file. And my colleagues will all be chuckling because they know I talk about it all the time. And it resides at my ministry because it was the responsibility I was given in a previous post at the Ministry of Forest, where I was tasked with leading the province's effort to expand the production and the use of mass timber in building products. So and we believe mass timber is key to diversifying and creating a more resilient forest sector. So by focusing on mass timber, we've seen opportunity to transition the forest sector to a higher value over high volume production. So that means helping people get back to work in a sustainable forestry-related jobs throughout the province. The export and use of BC-made mass timber creates long-term stable jobs for forest workers and supports forest-dependent communities. And BC is already a leader in the use of mass timber as an innovative way to reduce carbon footprint of our building sector. While they can be 1/5 the weight of concrete buildings, mass timber buildings still meet performance standards for safety, for structural resilience, and fire protection. So mass timber supports the province's effort to combat climate crisis and secure a better future for everyone in BC. So our government has made mass timber a priority. So part of our Strong BC Recovery Plan, we have the Mass Timber Demonstration Program, which is $3 million grant program designed to encourage the use of mass timber across BC. And so this grant program will help property developers and local governments adopt mass timber designs for their local construction projects. Some of the successful grant applicants will be made public in the next coming weeks. So for a while now, our government has been leading by example, driving demand of mass timber by using it in government-funded buildings whenever it's possible. So I'm encouraged to see local governments embracing mass timber as well. I think as of now, we have 21 BC communities who have committed to adopting mass timber technology in their local construction projects. The BC Building Code also allows for timber construction now up to 12 stories. We're leading the country in that. This means that mass timber buildings can go up to 12 stories in communities instead of what we had before, which was 6. Also, you mentioned the Strategic Investment Fund, and I'm super excited about that. And we'll be launching that fund very soon. It's also part of our Stronger BC Recovery Plan. It's a $500 million fund that will be managed by a new Crown corporation. And the fund will be used to invest in high potential BC businesses to help them grow and create good jobs in regions throughout this province. So the investment will be designed to generate financial returns for the province. However, they will also be driven by government priorities such as innovation, sustainability, and inclusiveness. So if you were looking for comparisons in our model, you would probably see something similar in the Irish Strategic Fund or the Danish Growth Fund. While the fund is open to invest in any sector, I see NBC as a great opportunity for the resource sector, so small and medium-sized companies, and all of that will be announced very soon. So in closing, our government's economic recovery plan is focused on helping people, businesses, and communities get back on track, and I'm super excited about both those initiatives.
Okay, you got a -1 because you went over time, so I take back my congratulations to you earlier. I'm going to go over to Minister Conroy, and I'm going to take like 20 seconds here because your name always generates an image of a Power Ranger. And I'll tell you why. I don't confess to be funny, but more of a policy nerd. You are one of BC's first power engineers, and also the first, I believe, the woman provincial forest minister who still has an active cattle ranch. So you can imagine why the Power Ranger comes to mind. So pick your color. Um, Seriously, to your question, our carbon storing forest products are poised to play a critical role in the fight against climate change. And I was listening to Alexa Young of Kofi yesterday, and she referenced how the breadth and depth of the forestry region of BC economy really helped drive its continuity. And the fact that this industry supports 100,000 well paying jobs is not lost on any of us. Can you provide some thoughts on the timeframes and specific initiatives to increase the value added initiatives of our forest economy and how any updates and modernization of these forest policies and any associated legislation doesn't become code for more uncertainty and increased cost to the industry?
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the recognition. I also want to recognize that we have the first ever female director, forest director in the province for that. So it's the minister as well. So that's exciting for the forest industry. But trees, they're real valuable for carbon sequestration and mitigating the impacts of climate change. And replanting harvested areas and those cleared by wildfires is also the foundation of BC's efforts to support a range of environmental benefits, including biodiversity and wildlife habitat and reducing flood risk. And I think it's really critical that we acknowledge that we planted a record 300 million trees last year. And I want to acknowledge the silviculture industry for the work that they did, because they did it without a single COVID outbreak in any of their camps, which is pretty incredible. And we want to continue to plant more trees for a healthy industry and healthy forests and help local governments reduce wildfire risk. And we're going to champion innovation in the forest sector that aligns with Clean BC, some of the objectives that Minister Heyman has referred to, but it also improves, we want to improve the sector efficiency, because we know that a balanced and diverse forest sector needs to support jobs, but also our commitments to the environment. And I think one of the things I just want to say is I don't think that's more clear anywhere than in our commitments to old growth. Our government committed to protect vital old growth stands while supporting workers and communities. But one thing we both agreed on, both sides have agreed on, is the old way of protecting old growth forests wasn't working for everyone, and we're really committed to doing things differently. And you wanted some specific initiatives, some time frames, and we need to focus on the economic recovery from COVID, but also know that we can't repeat mistakes from the past. And I think Minister Kahlon has referred to some of those, and that we've been, we're being innovative in our support for mass timber. I'm really excited about a mass timber mill in my own constituency just down the road here with the Kolesnikov mill, showing that we can do it in this province, and we're moving forward with it. We need to move, as Premier Horgan always says, we need to move from mass volume to being much more respective of and looking at secondary manufacturing, to looking at value instead of volume. And I think BC's forest sector, it's always been a cornerstone of our economy. It continues to be. But we need to adapt and innovate and make changes. So it might mean shipping fewer whole logs and profits outside of BC as we transition from that high volume to high value. And we know that we have a really strong dimension lumber sector, which is critical to our industry. And we know that builders around the world value our top quality wood, and we want those companies to be successful. But we've seen our industry become more consolidated and less diverse, and that's not good for the industry, and it's not good for the people of BC. So we are going to continue to support increases in value-added manufacturing, and the mass timber is a key step in that transition to the industry's use of second growth forests, which will help preserve our old growth forests while creating more jobs in BC. So we need to look at, from a 21st century forest sector that will be a mix of large industry, independent manufacturers, producing a diverse mix of traditional and innovative products. And selling them at home, but also selling them across the globe, because we know it's diversity that'll shield the province from down markets.
Thank you, Minister. Perhaps picking up on your theme of talking about doing things differently, we see a proliferation of land use planning activities, Minister Cullen, and land use classification systems currently underway in the province, some driven out of the regional offices, other at a provincial level, or others coming out of federal commitments to protected areas. I'm sure the attendees would love your thoughts on what specific land use policies the ministry is developing and implementing to support economic activity and certainty, whilst ensuring environmental sustainability and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And more particularly, how would these policies that you're developing align, unify, or replace the array of planning initiatives currently underway in the province? And you referenced the new Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Does this creation help unify those planning initiatives?
Fantastic question. But first, Sharon, if you didn't want Minister Kahlon to go over time, you should never ask him about mass timber. There's no way that you can get that enthusiast to try to get an answer under 2 minutes about something that he's so crazy for. To
I
your
was going to do
specific question,
on him, but I didn't.
To your specific question, we want to make it easier for good projects to come to market. I have seen, and the way to do that is by being predictable and having greater certainty in the process of permitting and to go through to get from A to B. In my former life, I was for the Northwest of British Columbia, and all too frequently I watched government of that question around social acceptance, environmental impact, reconciliation with First Nations. And companies were permitted, but did not acquire what we used to talk a lot about, which was social license. In looking at modernizing land use policy in British Columbia, I believe the more that we are consistent and predictable with the role of the public, local community, the government to government relations that Minister Rankin and others are pushing consistently in the Premier's office on down, the greater chance industry of understanding. And to my mind, this is an exercise much better done in practice than in theory. That you will see a number of tables around the province in which we are enacting a new land use policy for British Columbia. Out of those lessons, we will learn how to apply that more broadly across the province to offer communities, First Nations governance, the larger local government and broader public, but also industry, the sense of what the rules are and how to play within those rules. So the resource sector throughout the pandemic has been an absolute cornerstone for our economy. Making it stronger for the next generation to come is the singular focus of my work.
Thank you, Minister. And Minister Rankin, last but not least, in terms of your question, and I hope the audio is a bit better because my answer, repeating your answer won't be as good. We have seen a shift, as you referenced, with our relationship with Indigenous peoples, moving more towards a partnership-based approach rather than an engagement or transactional. And you may have heard Chief Gill today and Chief Lewin yesterday touch on some examples of that. And they also referenced DRPA, as you have, which offers significant opportunity for industry, Indigenous nations, and frankly, all British Columbians. But there are different interpretations, and managing expectations will reduce uncertainty. What is your ministry doing to provide that certainty to both industry and Indigenous peoples when it comes to resource development? And I just want to note that when we're talking about industry and Indigenous peoples, that Indigenous nations, apart from being rights holders, are increasingly wearing the hat of proponents in British Columbia, and also investors in our projects. So over to you, Minister.
Well, that's an excellent place from which to depart. I hope my audio is a bit better this time. I think many companies in the resource sector have recognized that collaborative nations make all the getting involved early and getting involved deeply in engagement, create long-term partnerships. Because after all, Indigenous communities want what all British Columbians want, sustainable development, good jobs, the things that we are all working together on. And I think we've had too long conflict in this sector. We all know that. And I think that the people who spoke yesterday were right, that there is, under the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, a real recognition that we can do things differently, align our laws, and work together to achieve their objectives. And I think that is the opportunity to create, if you will, an improved investment climate, a world-class destination for resource development. We all want that. And I'm really confident that we can achieve that if we get in early, do the kinds of things that many resource companies are now doing as a matter of routine. I think there's been enormous advances in this whole area. And I'm confident that with those kind of relationships that are being constructed, impact benefit agreements, arrangements, long-term arrangements, the province is involved in revenue sharing on a number of fronts as well, which I think is creating economic opportunities. So Sharon, I would like to deliver a very positive response. I think that we are creating greater certainty just by the kind of work that government is doing and industry increasingly has done as well.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to go over to the Whova app because I've been a hog and taken up a lot of your time. So if we can get some of the audience questions, which I can't see yet. Perfect. There we go. And I have to put this on another screen because, frankly, that's how it works because I can't see anything. Radio. So the first question is, permitting timelines are often an issue for timely project delivery in resource sector. What is government planning to kickstart the economic recovery on the regulatory front? And perhaps, Minister Heyman, I can direct this question to you first and then pass it on to others as well. And I'm thinking about the environmental assessment process, and that's why I'm directing this to you first.
I appreciate that. I think in many cases the permitting holdups exist in a number of ministries across government. And the previous forest minister, Doug Donaldson, made the point to us when we wanted to bring in some initiatives as part of recovery that without the staff to handle the reviews, it would just create a glut. And so we need to be alive to that we have the resources and staffing to have both an effective regulatory process, but not one that causes delays. It's very early in the implementation of the new Environmental Assessment Act. It's really only been in force for a few months now, but it was designed to put a lot of consultation at the front end to reach a closer decision. Now that's a bit different than permitting itself. There's the decision-making process where the actual report of the assessment is delivered to the ministers. There was to ensure that we identified early what some of the potential Indigenous and community and environmental concerns would be, so that proponents could not have to guess about it and focus their efforts at the front end to deal with them and to deal with a concept of the conditions that might be in play. And while the Environmental Assessment Office is responsible for issuing conditions and then monitoring some of the compliance, some of the follow-up permitting is with environment, and we are looking, I believe, across government and ensuring that we're not tardy in processing, and that we don't duplicate efforts across ministries. I think there's some models that we could look at to do that have been tried in other jurisdictions, and I've had some discussions in my ministry around, particularly with respect to trying to get some mining projects off the ground, but we haven't had a chance to fully discuss them, so I don't want to speculate publicly, but perhaps Minister Ralston, Minister Conroy, who also have significant responsibility in these areas, could speak.
You make a good point. There is a distinction between the environmental assessment process and permitting, but I think the question was probably framed a bit broader, given it takes approximately, I think, 13 years to permit a mine, and that's not laying the responsibility at this government. But going to more strict permitting, as you referenced, and you referenced Mr. Conroy, One of the issues that's been systematic has been the notice of work applications and timelines around that. Mr. Conroy, can you perhaps elaborate on that question and how would you answer it given your responsibilities? And then maybe I'll pass it over to Mr. Ralston as well.
So when I being minister for 2 years or 2 months, this was one of the first issues that was brought to my attention, so that I'm well aware of it and know that it's it's a challenge for industries, people seeking those permits. It's a multifaceted issues as Minister Heyman has referred to, but it's also we have to make sure that things are done correctly and including the incredibly important discussions with Indigenous nations to make sure that is undertaken. I have talked to staff and have asked them to get back to me on what is the holdup, what are the issues that the ministry is facing, and also working in collaboration with the other ministries, because it is definitely other ministries that are involved as well that are dependent on the permit process. So I'm actually hoping to get answers back within the next few weeks and move forward. And one of the issues is resourcing, and we are just having those discussions. So it's an issue that I understand, that I know is an issue, and we're working on it.
Mr. Ralston, would you like to add anything?
Oh, sure. I do hear from, particularly the mining sector, with gold at, well, it was up at $2,000 an ounce. Copper is rising. People at this point in the cycle are really anxious to get projects into production, whether it's Artemis in the Blackwater country, Eskay Creek in the northwest, Teck has Castle down in the southeast, or the expansion of Highland Valley, Caribou Gold in Barkerville. There are lots of projects that are working their way through the system. I have heard the complaints, and I think it's possible to accelerate the process without diminishing any of the environmental or other legitimate regulatory concerns. We have already, in the Mining Act, separated out a role for a chief permitting officer, taking that responsibility from the mines inspector and having someone in charge of enforcement as well, so that those two roles have been separated. That's a first step. But there is an internal process of considering the processing part. In the Oil and Gas Commission, which was created by the NDP in the late 90s, it's a one-stop shop. In 2010, when Pat Bell was the minister, Front Counter BC was set up. And what it involves is, I think the political discussion at the time was, mining did retain some part of the approval process, then the file is shipped over to Flinro and then comes back. And so in that process, I'm told, lots of time gets lost. So there's a high-level deputy minister-headed committee that is working on retooling the approval process. I share the concern of people in the sector and investors that they want to get these mines into production, and I'd very much like to be there with my colleagues and the government cutting a few ribbons. So I'm motivated to get these things underway.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. I know, Minister Rankin, you've answered this already, and I think the theme's highlighted again, but I will let you have a go at the second question that's received the most votes, which is, how are you managing the way forward with the implementation of DRIPA with the implementation of UNDRIP through DRIPA?
Well, of course, that's the number one priority that I have as the minister, as you might imagine, Sharon. And I think we're trying to demonstrate that achieving the objectives of DRIPA is about human rights, also about economic activities. Let me give you some examples. We have, it needs to be, I need to repeat that this isn't just this government's initiative. This bill was passed by the entire legislature, all three parties. So I take it as a mandate from everyone representing the people of British Columbia. So what we've done is as I say, number one, trying to be there to help innovate long-term agreements, whether they're treaties or whether they're comprehensive reconciliation agreements, self-government, whatever. We're open to trying to do as much as we can in the spirit of DRIPA. We've also got revenue sharing agreements. People may know that, for example, gaming revenue over the next 25 years, we've committed up to $3 billion to share gaming revenue. And I know some industry groups are also involved in revenue sharing of one sort or another. We spent a lot of money on language revitalization because we think that's important on the cultural side. Affordable housing, we're committed to $550 million over 10 years, some of which is actually housing on Indian reserves. A new K-12 curriculum. When I was growing up, I didn't know anything about residential schools, I'm embarrassed to say, but all of our children who graduate from grade 12 will have had some understanding of Indigenous history and culture in this province. An action plan is what has to be done under the bill, and I'm working on that to align our laws and to also try to make sure that some of the things that the government does are consistent with what the objectives are of DRIPA, which, as you know, covers 46 articles, covers a lot of ground. So we think that this kind of work is important to not only the government but to industry as well, because we're trying to create an environment where people are confident to invest in British Columbia, that we have willing and able partners, of course, in Indigenous communities. And we think that helps everyone, including, of course, industry.
Thank you, Minister. And I think your job will be a little, hopefully, easier with Bill C-15 federally. I'm going to go to the next question, and I will pose that to Minister Kahlon and Minister Conroy. In terms of what would your next move be to support communities that are suffering from forest mill closures?
I'll start, Minister Conroy. The last hat I was wearing before I was put into this ministry was spending a lot of time supporting our interior communities, in particular, that were hard hit by mill closures, and it was a really challenging time to be in those communities where people, Indigenous communities, businesses were being disrupted, and so many of those conversations were about first building stability. So we were able to get in there and provide supports for workers who were close to retirement, so that they could bridge into retirement, so that younger workers could take jobs, which was successful. We have huge economic development projects that were happening in the regions that desperately needed skilled workforce. So we were able to provide training opportunities for people to reskill and get onto those projects and get apprenticeship opportunities, and so that was, I think, fairly successful. But I spent a lot of time in these communities talking to local leaders as well about what do they need. And where is their local economy going next? And connectivity, I think, was one of the biggest. I think it's not only something that you would like to have now. It's essentially a human right. And so we need to continue to expand connectivity because this pandemic has shown us that people can work away from home, and that's ensuring that connectivity is in communities throughout this province means people can work from remote locations, which gives opportunities for some of the smaller communities in particular to attract young families where there's a better affordability. So I would say that we started with, I think when in 2017, it was around $10 million invested to expand connectivity in the last mile. We went up to $50 million, and this budget, we're up to $90 million a year, working with our partners to expand that, and that work needs to continue. So I'll leave it there because I know I took too much time on my last answer.
Okay, and I'll pick up on where you left off. One of the really interesting things, and the forest sector was really struggling, as Ravi has said, and it was the government took those initiatives to support not only the workers but the communities as well, because I'm from a resource industry town. I have sawmills and pulp mills and Tekmenko in my constituency, and anytime the resource industries are suffering, your communities suffer too. So, those initiatives were put in place, and working with the communities to try to support the communities as well as the workers. What's an interesting phenomenon is that the forest industry is one of the industries that has done really well in COVID. Like it was struggling in the beginning, but now it's having unheard of record profits. And one of the things that's happened is, and I have some numbers here, between March of 2020 and January of this year, 41 mills which had been curtailed or closed have resumed operations in some way, and bringing almost 7,500 people back to work in the province, which is pretty incredible. But what we need to do, like, times are good right now, but what we need to do is look at what our policies are, what our legislation is, and like look at our Forest Range and Practices Act, look at our Forestry Act, and say, what do we need to change? What do we need to change to make sure we're supporting the industry, making sure we are moving from volume to value added, and so we're looking at that legislation. We're looking at ways that we can work together with communities, having groups out in the communities that are providing input to us. So it's incredibly important that we're working with everybody involved. So we're bringing together the communities, the Indigenous nations, working with the employees, with the companies to say, what can we do to work together? And Ravi's obviously mentioned some of those initiatives, and we're going to continue, because we know, as I've said, that forestry is a cornerstone of our economy, and we know that that's going to continue. So.
Thank you, Minister. I'm not sure if Minister Cullen would like to respond or add anything, but I do note that one of your mandate items is to continue to modernize land use planning for BC's forests as well as public land and waters. But if you have anything to add, I don't want to take the time away from you. So please do if you need to.
No, I know there are a lot of questions, so let's maybe hit to another question if we could.
Perfect. The next question is, the federal government is advancing a public policy priority of moving Canada to a leadership role in transitioning to a low carbon economy, including battery and specialty material opportunities. To take advantage of this, how do we capitalize on the federal priority if it takes an average over 13 years to permit a mine? I promise I didn't write that, but I do note that there are essentially smelting that produces a byproduct for many of these the battery and specialty materials, so it would have to show some sort of support for smelting as well. Perhaps Minister Ralston, you may want to take this question.
Sure. I think I touched on some of the themes in my answer to the previous question. But certainly our commitment, Minister Heyman has spoken about Clean BC, and Minister Kahlon has also spoken about the recovery process and some of our investment priorities in that recovery process. So the commitment to creating a low carbon economy is a sincere one, it's a genuine one, it's supported by action and legislation. So we're moving forward on that. And the opportunities there are huge. The opportunity given interest of environment, social and governance investors, willing to and wanting to, looking for investments that reflect those kind of values is an opportunity for British Columbia, given all the attributes that we have on the regulatory side and just the stable government that we represent, the opportunities for employment at fair wages, the environmental standards. Some of the attributes that have been previously criticized as deterring investors, I think now will attract investors. So what we're trying to do is being aware of that, build a BC brand for responsible metals and mining, for example, attract capital and change the regulatory process in a way that eliminates unnecessary delays, and that involves, as Minister Cullen has said and others have said, to make sure that we have the labor, the people in the approval process to get the work done, and understand that we need to re-engineer the approval process in a way so that it does not diminish standards, but it makes sure that we can get through and get, in the case of new mines, where there's a huge market for many metals and many minerals, as the question identifies, get that done in a way that will get those mines into production so that we can have the jobs, the revenue, the prosperity that those kind of projects bring.
Well, thank you. And I think we are pretty much out of time there. So we have 18 seconds left. And with that, I'll probably just do a brief wrap up here. First of all, ministers, thank you so much for your time. I know that time was tight and you probably didn't get to get all your comments out. And we basically need a panel for each of you, so an hour for each of you. But I do want to note that there's 6 of you on here, and as I said, it's highly unusual. But your presence demonstrates, I think, the support and priority that you placed on the natural resources sector, and giving us some comfort, and the obviously the attendees, in terms of that you understand and are receptive to the commentary that we may have to provide in terms of how we can add value to BC, and in turn how BC can help us deliver that value. Thank you for also mostly keeping to the time limit. I'm looking specifically at Minister Kahlon, but he may not notice because of the camera. Your job is not easy. We know that. It's often you hear every time you propose a change or some sort of new idea that you may feel the only feedback that you're getting is the inherent risks and the myriad of issues with the proposal. But let me tell you from my engagements with government alongside or representing the resources sector, and certainly from my work with the Canadian LNG Alliance, the Mining Association BC, and also the Association of Mineral Explorers, that the dialogue is often more collaborative than the messaging may appear to be. It's focused on developing solutions. It's working to reduce uncertainty, and it's respectfully challenging the rationale, both for the existing status quo and what's being proposed by government. This lens that's applied by industry is also picked up by government, and that lens is essentially how do we increase BC's competitiveness whilst not compromising on our commitment to a strong ESG performance. Lastly, but not least, I want to thank certain people, Sarah Weber, Melissa McRitchie, and the army of government staffers that made all this happen. Essentially, 6 of you in 1 hour, and doing all the tech checks. Thank you also to the sponsor, Tourmaline Oil. Your support and those of other sponsors couldn't have also made this resource conference possible. And thank you to the attendees. I feel privileged to have been asked to moderate this panel. I hope you have an excellent rest of the conference. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, ministers, for your participation in our session this afternoon. Well, that brings day 2 of the 18th Annual BC Natural Resources Forum to a close. We truly appreciate the support and participation that we are seeing. On behalf of all of today's speakers, we are pleased to make a donation to the United Way of Northern BC. The United Way of Northern BC aims to improve communities in Northern BC through connecting resources to local needs. UWNBC positively affects 1 in 3 people through their impact work in the region. Please visit their virtual booth for more information. We look forward to seeing you online tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for another great day of high-quality presentations and virtual networking. Once again, we're going to hear from leaders across BC and Canada's resource sectors. We're going to hear from Premier John Horgan, as well as Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson. We've got many more speakers as well, so we sure hope we see you tomorrow.